TV7 Israel News is made possible thanks to your generous donations.
Shalom ve'erev tov, good evening. Welcome to our daily TV7 Israel News Bulletin, broadcast from Jerusalem. U.S. President Donald Trump dubs the Ayatollah regime's latest response to his 14-point proposal as totally unacceptable. An advisor to the Ayatollah regime's supreme leader vows to persist in frustrating freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. And Prime Minister Benjamin Nteanyahu asserts that the war versus Iran is not over. The Islamic Republic of Iran is digging in, effectively pushing back on any attempt to reach a negotiated solution with the United States. Speaking from Rome over the weekend, U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio voiced hope that the Ayatollah regime would provide a serious counterproposal to the Trump administration's latest 14-point proposal, which sought to address all core issues.
Their system is still highly fractured and a bit dysfunctional as well, so that may be serving as an impediment. I hope it's a serious offer. I really do.
Washington's top diplomat further addressed the Ayatollah regime's continued efforts to prevent freedom of navigation in the strategic Strait of Hormuz. All the while, U.S. Central Command is reportedly positioning itself to relaunch Operation Project Freedom that aims to force the strategic waterway open. According to Secretary Rubio, ahead of President Donald Trump's trip to China on Wednesday, Beijing and other major capitals are keen on having the Strait of Hormuz reopened as soon as possible.
We think it's to the benefit of China, the United States, and the world writ large that there be stability in the straits there, and that continues to be our position. That's the one we'll continue to stand by and advocate for.
Secretary Rubio was further asked about a recent decision by the United States to withdraw some of its forces from Germany and other European countries, and whether it indicated a shift in U.S. policy towards the North Atlantic Treaty Organization.
I've been a strong supporter of NATO throughout my career in the Senate and even now, and one of the advantages of being in NATO is that it allows us to have forces deployed in Europe and bases that allow us a logistical ability to project power in the case of contingencies. Well, we had a contingency, and some countries in Europe, like Spain as an example, denied us the use of those bases for a very important contingency that in some ways the denial of those bases actually impeded the mission, not severely, but had a cost and in fact even created some unnecessary dangers. So if one of the main reasons why the U.S. is in NATO is the ability to have forces deployed in Europe that we could project to other contingencies, and now that's no longer the case, at least when it comes to some NATO members, that's a problem, and it has to be examined. But ultimately, that's a decision for the president to make. His team and people like myself and others will provide him what those potential options are, but ultimately he'll have to make that decision. He hasn't made those decisions yet. As far as recent news of deployments, like for example, those were all already ongoing. For example, in Germany, the troops that were withdrawn, which represent less than 14% of our total troop presence there, that's already pre-programmed. And in fact, all it did is take us back to where we were in 2022. So there was always a plan to do some shifting within NATO. As far as broader changes, I don't have an announcement for you on that today, but that's a decision for the president to make.
Among the countries that had blocked the transit of U.S. aircraft from the United States through Europe to the Middle East was France, with French President Emmanuel Macron pushing back at any request for support. Consequently, and in light of the Ayatollah regime's decision to frustrate freedom of navigation through the strategic Strait of Hormuz, French farmers are now increasingly feeling the consequences of the strategic negligence of their leadership.
So today, this fertilizer is costing me more and more. It's now almost 600 euros a ton. At one point, to give you an idea, I set up my farm 16 years ago. I used to need just over a ton of wheat to buy a ton of fertilizer. Today, it's more like a factor of 3. So it's quite significant. Today, it is true that the real difficulty of having to buy fertilizer at a much higher price is that we sell cereals, for example barley here or wheat, at global market prices. And those global prices, I can't pass on the cost, the extra 25% for my fertilizer, into my final price. So I'm caught between a rock and a hard place. Basically, I'm dependent on global fertilizer prices on the one hand, which have skyrocketed. And on the other hand, I'm dependent on global cereal prices, which have stayed very low. If the war drags on and there is a genuine shortage, we are likely to see fertilizer prices rise even further. And so, we'll have to make decisions about which crops to grow, and whether or not to sow certain crops. Because if we know from the outset that we're going to be in the red, it might be better not to work at all, or at least to focus on the most productive plots or the crops that will allow us to make a living in the future.
After failing to act in time, European leaders are now ordering their militaries to deploy assets in the vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz to prepare for an operation. Among them, French President Emmanuel Macron has instructed his country's Charles de Gaulle carrier strike group to position itself. Asked whether it was part of a Franco-British deployment to help secure freedom of navigation, the French leader said the following.
There has never been, nor has there ever been any talk of, a French or Franco-British deployment. A few days ago, I made the decision to move the Charles de Gaulle and the frigates accompanying it, as well as the entire carrier strike group, beyond the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and thus to move from the eastern Mediterranean to the vicinity. There has never been any question of a deployment, but we are standing by. From the very beginning, we have been saying one very simple thing: freedom of navigation.
Liberté de navigation.
Meanwhile, in Iran, an advisor to the new supreme leader, Ayatollah Mujtaba Khamenei, insisted that the Ayatollah regime's exploitation of the Strait of Hormuz will persist.
On the issue of the Strait of Hormuz, for years we neglected this advantage. In reality, it is a capability on the level of an atomic bomb. When you hold a position from which a single decision can affect the entire global economy, that is an extremely great capability. What we have gained through this war, we will by no means give up. Now, if through international mechanisms we can in fact change the regime governing the strait, then fine, otherwise we will do it through our own domestic laws.
In what appears to be an errant attack by the RGC, the designated terror group attacked the Ayatollah regime's closest ally, drawing a condemnation from Beijing.
According to information currently available, the vessel attacked is Marshall Islands flagged and has Chinese crew on board. As of now, no casualties have been reported. China is deeply concerned that the ongoing conflict has affected a large number of vessels and seafarers and left them stranded in the strait, stressing that restoring unimpeded passage as soon as possible and ensuring the safety of civilian ships and crew are in the common interests of regional countries and the wider international community.
The Ayatollah regime's attacks on freedom of navigation is increasingly pressuring countries to respond, with South Korea's presidential national security advisor, Ri Song-lak, pledging to retaliate for an attack on a South Korean cargo vessel, which faced an attack on May 4th.
Our government maintains that attacks on civilian vessels, including the HMM Namu, can neither be justified nor tolerated, and we condemn this in the strongest terms. Through further investigation, we will identify who was behind the attack, the exact model and its physical dimensions, among other details. Based on these findings, we will consider the necessary response measures.
Meanwhile, the Ayatollah regime responded to Washington's 14-point proposal, rejecting all demands related to its nuclear program, demanding American reparations in addition to demands to maintain a hold on the strategic Strait of Hormuz under any future negotiated solution. In response, President Donald Trump posted on his Truth Social platform, quote, "I have just read the response from Iran's so-called representatives. I don't like it. Totally unacceptable." Earlier, in an exclusive interview to Full Measure with Cheryl Atkinson, President Trump stressed that while the Islamic Republic was in fact defeated militarily, it does not mean that the Ayatollah regime is done. Therefore, according to the American leader, reigniting a kinetic operation is highly likely.
They are defeated, but that doesn't mean they're done. We could go in for 2 more weeks and do every single target. We have certain targets that we wanted to do.
Similar sentiments were remarked by Prime Minister Benjamin Nteanyahu in an exclusive interview he gave to CBS's 60 Minutes.
I think it accomplished a great deal, but it's not over because there's still nuclear material, enriched uranium that has to be taken out of Iran. There's still enrichment sites that have to be dismantled. There are still proxies that Iran supports. There are ballistic missiles that they still want to produce. Now, we've degraded a lot of it, but all of that is still there, and there's work to be done.
Meanwhile, in Tehran, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baghei claimed that President Trump's position was shaped by Israel rather than the malign behavior of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Thank you for watching TV7 Israel News, which is made possible by the generosity of our viewers. If you would like to help support TV7 Israel, which is exclusively donation-based, you can do so via our website at www.tv7israelnews.com. Please keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem and redemption of Israel. I'm Jonathan Hessen, wishing you a Shavua Mevorach. God willing, until our next update, Shalom from Jerusalem.